Thank you, Jim. Hi, my name is David Williams, and I am a board member and program coordinator for the Guild. It is an honor and pleasure to be here. And more importantly, for me, it's an honor and pleasure to introduce Danica Sterud-Miller. I was lucky enough to interview Danica several years ago when I was working on my home waters. And it was just such a delightful conversation. I've been working over the years or so to try and get her back. And so timing has worked out well. So I'm very excited to hear what she has to say. Danica is an associate professor of American Indian Studies at the University of Washington, Tacoma, which resides on her ancestral lands. Her research focuses on textual constructions of indigenous sovereignty, federal Indian law, and Puyallup resistance. She is also co-director of the University of Washington Center of American Indian and Indigenous Studies, which is dedicated to offering structural support and resources for Indigenous faculty, students, and staff. And without further ado, you don't want to hear me, we want to hear Danica. So I'm just going to turn it over to her, and I believe she's going to do a share screen. And just again, to reiterate, if you have questions, please enter them into the chat, and don't be shy about entering them in any time through the Danica's presentation. It's always sort of a nice way to have those up there in case you forget, as I'm often want to do, of what I was going to ask. So Danica, I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you. Oh, you're muted, Danica.
All right, there we go. Uh, Hi, thank you so much, everyone, for that introduction, and thank you so much for being here tonight. Um, uh, just to be as transparent as possible, my oldest daughter, who's 14, left this morning to go on a study abroad trip to Ireland, and she left at we had Ever at the airport at 2:15 a.m. And I've never been away from her for more than 4 days, and she'll be gone for 8. So I'm very tired and also feeling very emotional. And while I know that vulnerability is the best way to be in good relations with our community, I'm not sure how well it translates over Zoom, but I'm going to try my best to be uh, as non weepy as possible. This talk actually always kind of makes me a little bit weepy, anyways. But I guarantee, be awkward when I'm trying to share my screen and do that part of that bit. So just give me 1 second here. In my little show. Yes, I also do extremely plain and boring PowerPoints as well. So when I first began working at UW-T, I moved back. It was about a little. This is my 10th year, I think, or 9th at UW-T. When I first started at UW-T, I came back. My dad said that there's two things that he wanted me to look at. He wanted me to that he felt were not talked about, or not understood, and needed really to be looked at. And those two things were the Executive Order of 1857 and Andrews v. City of Tacoma. And we were actually talking about this a little bit before you all came into the room, but many of you might not be familiar with, or probably most of you, right, aren't familiar with sort of the history of the Puyallup tribe. And maybe what you see today is what is the Puyallup tribe. Right now they're the 5th largest employee of Pierce County. They're an economic powerhouse. They're sort of this, part of amazing sort of cultural and sovereign sort of revitalization of tribes in Washington State today. I know a lot of you are probably from Seattle, but these language signs are sort of all over Tacoma and Fife. This roughly translates as "I love Indian gaming," but that's a joke. It's not what it translates as. I can't tell if you're laughing or not, but anyways, um, the but anyways, we have language signs everywhere, and while I've deeply loved these language signs, I think they're really great, and they make me smile. At the same time, there's always this feeling for me, right, of the history of the city of Tacoma and how it has almost its entire history treated you know, my people, right, in ways that were and are uh, violent and you know, theories of and and acts of erasure, right? Um, so this is, you know, I'm going to be talking about that. This is a weird old map that I have that I got off the internet years ago, and I've never really updated. I think it might be like German. um, but you can see this is our original sort of land that we this is our original ancestral land. And then this is what sort of it kind of gets down to is this little teeny bit, this orange bit right here, is what's going to happen after the Treaty of Medicine Creek, which I assume most of you are familiar with, but it's one of the Stevens treaties, the first one, and this is where we're going to have this setup for the three reservations, which are going to be Nisqually, Puyallup, and Squaxin Island. Right now, I hope that you are all aware that the Treaty of Medicine Creek, parts of it are down at the History Museum. I saw Gwen is in here somewhere. Hi, Gwen. And I hope that you all go down to the History Museum to see it. I saw it a couple, maybe like a month ago when it first opened up at the History Museum. I was with my dad and some other tribal leaders, and it was a really beautiful, really amazing experience, actually. And when I'm still sort of still processing. But that is to say that this is where we lost, you know, something like 90% of our ancestral land base, right, to bring us down to the reservation initially. And actually, and then this is me. High 10 is my ancestor, my direct ancestor who signed the Medicine Creek Treaty. And it was, I'm assuming a lot of you are familiar with this history, so I'm not going to go into too many details. But if you aren't, please ask these questions in the chat and I can come back to them. But immediately after the signing of the Treaty of Medicine Creek, we go to war, right? This is one of the treaty wars led most famously by Chief Lachey, but certainly many other Puyallup and Nisqually, Squaxin, and other tribal warriors were involved. And, you know, mostly this is in response to the completely unfair treaty, right? It was especially, I mean, Puyallup had it bad, Nisqually had it even worse. They had zero access to their fishing grounds, and in response to the treaty war, and the Executive Order of 1857 is signed. So this is actually the first thing that my dad wanted me to look at. I was I was upset to learn that the only copy of the Executive Order of 1857, the only, you know, real copy is just like in a box in the National Archives. When I asked to look at it, they're like, "Oh, the guy who's in charge of that box, he's like not around right now." And so then they sent me like kind of a terrible photocopy. But basically what it does is it enlarges the reservation to include for the Puyallup parts of the port. And this is going to become really, really important as I move into the later part of the talk. But when we have the port, a later judgment in 1981, it's gonna involve this executive order and how the landlines are moved up, and then it's gonna become really important actually just a few weeks ago. So this is the Dawes. This is after the Dawes Act, or the General Allotment Act, which I don't know how many of you are familiar with, but this is where our reservation lands, and not just Puyallup, but throughout the nation, are the reservation is cut into, you know, individual allotments so that we can American Indians can become individual landowners, right? Or you know, turn us into proper American farmers. And of course, these land allotments are given to male heads of households. There's all sorts of ways that this is an extraordinarily colonial act. But most importantly, right, is that the reason was not just to turn us into individual landowners, it's to make it easier to sell, because it's hard to sell a large piece of land that's communally owned. And when we break it down into little bits, it becomes much, much easier to sell. This is the allotment that I grew up on. So I grew up on one of the last few continuously owned allotments by the Puyallups. Um, and that actually brings me to me. And let's see, there's me and my grandma at a powwow. I was about 3 years old. Um, uh, my grandma used to make us matching powwow dresses, which is um, I think the greatest thing in the world. And um, and so this is the land that she grew up on. This is the land I grew up on. I was lucky to live on the land with her for a few years. Um, and who am I? So Hashakil, Tzitzi Ab, Danica Steard Miller, Tzitsta Spialapash Ched, Sti Ab Bill Steard, Tzitsta I Dibad Spialapash, Carl William Steard, I Tutsapa, Idatsabash, Marjorie Matheson Sterud, my grandma, Tzitsta I Tukaya Spialapash, Tuthaltith, Young Siaya. So this is my grandma. And let's see. This is me. So this would have been this is my grandma right here as a baby. This is my great grandma, my great grandfather, and my great uncles, all of whom who grew up on this land. By the 1910s, what we're going to have for the Puyallup Reservation is we're going to have unbelievable rapid land loss. Most of these the allotments are going to be sold at such a rapid rate that actually the federal government is going to step in and just sort of give a warning that says something like, you can't steal it like that, obviously, it makes us look bad. But still, it went very quickly. Again, about 90% of it was sold in about a 15-year timeline, especially that which was along the port and up in along the water. Yes. The next thing that's going to happen is the Indian Reorganization Act. I mean, the next thing, but the next thing for our sorry, for the purposes of this talk is we're going to have the Indian Reorganization Act of 1936. And this is the act that that ends the Dawes Act, which was the Allotment Act, which the Dawes Act is more or less considered to be the most detrimental federal Indian law against American Indians, which is saying a lot, right? Indian Reorganization Act tries to reverse it. And one of the ways that they try to reverse it, well, a couple of things that they did that I'm not going to go into, but they encouraged the election of democratically elected tribal councils, right? It's important to note that we always had leadership in all these different ways, but this is the first time that we really see the U.S. government encouraging it in a nod to sovereignty, I guess. We're going to have the implementation of tribal constitutions, but importantly for this talk is we're going to have the buying back of trust land. So if I take you back again to these little bits. When the allotments were made into that, this is like one of those things that's sort of hard to explain, but the allotments belong to us, but they're really held in trust by the US government, right? And the US government sort of decides whether or not they're sort of keeping it safe for us, I guess, in some ways. It's an extremely colonial sort of way of controlling our land ownership. At the same time, trust has become something that will eventually be an important thing that we're able to advocate for our own sovereignty. But what this means with the Indian Reorganization Act is because so many of the allotments have been sold, and this is across the country, I'm just using Puyallup as an example right here, we end up having a real checkerboard effect, right? So the reservation is cut up into little like checkerboards, right? Instead of the sort of communal land base that has always been so important to our people. Under the Indian Reorganization Act, the Secretary of the Interior is authorized to start buying up land that's in between the checkerboards that fell out of ownership and move it back into trust status, and therefore like sort of build back again this communal land base. Let's see, me and my grandma again. Grandma again. I can never get these where I want them. My grandma around the Indian Reorganization Act. And you know, and then we have World War II, right? And after World War II, we then move into a policy of the United States moves into a policy of termination and assimilation and relocation, moving American Indians out of the reservations and into cities. One of the ways that we resisted this and really came together was through the fish wars, right? This is going to start earlier, but really going to start to flourish in the 1960s. I feel a lot of us are probably familiar with the fish wars, and I decided not to show any pictures from the fish wars, but instead I'm showing a picture of a lot of the men that were involved in the fish wars, but this was their baseball team, the Fife Reds. This was my great uncle. You saw a picture of him as a baby just a minute or so ago. And sort of the point of me showing you this picture, right, is to show just all of the different ways that we were existing and have existed, right? Like that my uncles, my great uncles were, you know, fighting in the fish wars and fighting to fish and to support their families. And they were also, you know, playing baseball and just that there's a lot of Native joy, always part of Native resistance. And so then in response to the fish wars, we have sort of the first times that the city of Tacoma, or Pierce County in this case, is going to declare that the Puyallup tribe doesn't exist. This is part of Puyallup 1. Puyallup 1, Puyallup 2, and Puyallup 3 are 3 different Puyallup court cases that deal mainly with sort of what kind of nets are being used in fishing. This isn't, I need to like think more carefully about these whole net things, but I don't really think about it that much. But what I do think about a lot is the fact that in May 1965, Judge John C. Cochran of the Pierce County Superior Court declared the Puyallup tribe no longer existed because the reservation no longer existed. This was despite the fact that 2 pieces of trust land were still held by the Puyallup, and several pieces of land which had fallen out of trust but were still owned by the Puyallup also existed. This is you know, and of course it's not taking into account, right, that why our land base no longer doesn't exist in the way that it had once, right? So this is where we have like the first time, right, that the Puyallup tribe, where they're trying to basically use the court system and to force the Puyallup tribe out of a legitimate existence, right, one recognized by the courts, though we certainly obviously still existed. Eventually in 1967, the Washington Supreme Court, sorry, I want to go back, is going to assert that the Puyallup tribe does in fact exist, but whether or not the reservation still existed, they did not comment on. So we're still sort of in this weird limbo. And then as the fish wars are really gearing up, in the early 1970s, right? This is the Battle of Tacoma, where the fish warriors had moved to what was thought to be the second piece of communally owned Puyallup land, which is over on the Puyallup River, the other one being the Puyallup Cemetery. And on September 9th, 1970, it's going to erupt into battle, where over 70 Native men, women, and children will be arrested that day. This, of course, is going to lead us to Bolt. 3 weeks later, the United States government is going to sue US v. Washington, and 4 years later, it's going to be decided. Much, I think, to the astonishment of everyone, where 50% of the allowable catch will go to federally recognized tribes. I'm not going to go on the Bolt decision because I'm assuming most of you are familiar with that, but one of the things the Bolt decision does say is that they say actually the Puyallup Reservation and the tribe does exist. So we've got so now we're like on kind of like number 2 here, right? That the second time, like, okay, we're gonna settle it. It does exist. And again, just to talk up the History Museum, the Washington State History Museum, there's a really nice Bolt decision exhibit now right across the way from the Medicine Creek Treaty. Brings us to, I don't know how familiar you are with this history, but of course the state deeply resented and violently reacted against the Judge Bolt decision, so much so that the federal government had to step in and take over because of the violence and the refusal to enact the Bolt decision. And then part of this, from my perspective, is going to be that, let's see, the city of Tacoma is going to sue Andrews, who's the Secretary of the Interior, in 1978 for trying to put more Puyallup land back into trust. And they're going to say you can't do that because the Puyallup Reservation really doesn't exist. So therefore you can't put more land back into a reservation that doesn't actually exist. So growing up, this was the other story that I always heard, is that that in 1978, the city of Tacoma was trying to remove federal recognition from the Puyallup tribe. And we said that the Puyallup tribe always existed because there was no reservation land. But we said that the reservation land existed because our family had always existed on our allotment since time immemorial. So this is my grandma, and this is her sister, who grew up on this land. Again, two sisters and a cousin grew up on this land. And when it was finally decided whether or not this piece of land was part of the was the Puyallup tribe and could be put into trust, and that the Puyallup Reservation existed, this is the ruling. There's three different pieces of land. There's 3 other Puyallups who are part of this as well. The final tract in issue comprises about 1/3 of an acre. It was transferred to the United States by Marjorie Sterud, an enrolled Puyallup, to be held in trust for her son, William. The tract has been in the Sterud family since its original allotment, and it is unclear how the land ever passed out of trust status. What is clear is that the land was heavily encumbered and had often been on the verge of distress sale. William Sterud worked off to pay off the liens, and the land was accepted into trust. On it stands only a dilapidated shack, which William hopes to convert into a decent home for his family. So that's me. I'm 2 years old at this time, and that's my dad and my grandma. The ruling continues. What is missing from this necessarily short and sterile description is the pathos behind these attempts to restore trust land. These actors in these transactions are not wealthy individuals conniving ways to cheat the local government out of a tax dollar. They are not irresponsible illiterates creating disturbances and non-conforming structures in a downtown or industrial sector. They are self-respecting and, for that matter, self-denying people trying to preserve their tribe as a viable entity and to maintain themselves with a modicum of dignity and self-support. In one sense, that is irrelevant because the BIA seemingly does not particularize these human factors when it decides whether or not to accept trust responsibilities. In the more important sense, it is not. The Indian Reorganization Act was designed to assist tribes and enrolled members in just the circumstances here portrayed. And then, let's see, what I think we're in 1970, 78. This is 1980, June 11th, 1980, where 3 years before, Ramona Bennett is going to lead a takeover of Cascadia, which the U.S., the state will decide does belong to the Puyallup tribe, but they don't give us the title. And June 11th, 1980, my dad will lead a second takeover, and a week later, the title of Cascadia, which is where the Puyallup tribal headquarters exists now, where the Emerald Queen Casino is in Tacoma, will revert back to the Puyallup tribe. I adore this picture of my dad. He looks so happy and sort of indifferent to the heavily armed people who are clearly, my dad's a big threat here, right? Who are keeping everyone safe. What this is going to do, I argue, is that after the success of the city of Tacoma v. Andrews for the Puyallup tribe then is going to sue the Port of Tacoma about the exterior boundaries of the Puyallup Reservation, specifically that which is in the Executive Order of 1857 that I began with. The United States, shockingly, believed that the riverbed was public land and belonged to them. We disagreed. Is that the next picture I want to show? Yes. I'm sorry, I guess I didn't make this into a slide. Mm-hmm. I feel like I have a good quote that I wanted to share with you on this, but we won, and the riverbed belongs to us. What this then means is then we have the accumulation of two very important post-Bolt verdicts, and it's going to bring us to the next very big one, which is, I'm bringing you to those same four little kids that you saw at the very, very beginning. This is my grandma again, my Uncle Joe, Don Matheson, one of the Fish Warriors, and Prudy Matheson. And it brings us to the Puyallup Tribal Land Settlement, which at the time was the largest settlement to a tribe. The agreement indicated that negotiating parties recognized the legitimacy of Puyallup land claims. There was different sort of claims within the Puyallup land settlement, but one of which was that a lot of the titles were illegally transferred in the 1910, 1920s land grab, as well as what the Port of Tacoma, what the rights were to the Port of Tacoma riverbed. This is this is my dad and my Aunt Prudy, my Aunt Patty, and my great aunt celebrating after the Puyallup Tribal land settlement at Harbor Lights, of course, which is where I think a lot of these negotiations went down. And so, in conclusion, let's see. Growing up, and in fact, I just talked to my dad like 5 minutes before this talk started. He had something he wanted to talk to something else he wanted to talk to me about. He always called it Andrews versus the city of Tacoma, not the city of Tacoma v. Andrews. And it took me a long time, right, to figure out why he would do that. But of course, it's because it wasn't in defense from his perspective, right? It was something that we were fighting for, that we demanded, and it was something that really coming off of Bolt, where we see so much of our ability to self-determine and fight for our sovereignty, and it building upon itself. And finally, this is my dad. This is my three sisters. This is all of the grandkids, and there's actually another one there that who has been born since this. All of us on our original allotment land. My dad still lives there with and my sister lives there with her family as well. Um, and we will always be there. Let's see.
Thank you, Danica. Amazing to hear a story that is so interwoven with your personal story. So I very much appreciate you sharing that and helping us to understand better that story. So let me a variety of questions. So first one that I see, just sort of working my way, how does it become out of trust when still owned by land? I'm guessing, how does land become out of trust when it's still owned by the Puyallup, if I'm interpreting that question correctly?
You know, for our land specifically, we actually don't know how it fell out of trust. And I think, you know, there's, we can just sort of think in terms of, you know, access documents and endemic poverty, right? And who has access to these documents and how it fell out of trust. So we're not really sure how, but it was still our land. But it's a good question. But I don't think, I think importantly, right, our family wouldn't be unique, right? That this is probably a question that, and something that has happened to families, you know, across the nation with their allotments. That these sort of documents and this sort of paperwork, you know, is a colonial tool, right? It's meant to erase ownership. We still retain the land, and it was still ours, but the trust relationships somehow had it was no longer in trust, and that has actually never been understood.
Great, thank you. Can you elaborate on how Judge Cochran concluded that the lack of a reservation meant that the tribe no longer existed?
Well, I mean, it's the logic is like really circular, but it's actually sort of the same logic that we see with the Duwamish, right? Today, right? The reason that they didn't get federal recognition, I think the last time, was because they no longer have a land base, so therefore they're no longer a tribe. And then, well, if you don't have if you don't have people living on your land base, then you're not a tribe. And then, but it's the circular logic that isn't like rooted in history, right? It's not taking into account why those things are. Did I answer all of that question?
Yeah, I mean it's sadly a classic catch-22
Yeah,
circular
and
that you're saying, if I
I
understand.
don't, right, and I don't think that, you know, I would assume that that's what he's looking, you know, that it's not looking to uphold the rights of the Puyallup here, right? It's what we're seeing here over and over, especially with Puyallup 1, Puyallup 2, Puyallup 3, and just all of the arrests that are happening during the fish wars simultaneously at this time, right, is just the attempt by the state, right, to just sort of um, to sue us into poverty, right? Or to sue us, you know, to take away, they don't have any, the state has zero right to take away federal recognition from the Puyallup tribe. That's something that can only happen at the federal level, right? But what we have happening here is just this sort of violent attempts at erasure, and sort of betting on the fact that the Puyallup won't have the resources to fight back. And it's, you know, and it's really it you know, like I said, like I grew up with so many of these amazing elders and these ancestors, and this is the work that I do today, is in this research, and I'm still just amazed, and it's unbelievable the amount of perseverance and resistance and work that my elders did with nothing, and taking care of their families and working full-time jobs and doing everything that they could while just dealing with, you know, violence and racism and constantly, and really never, a lot of them never seen the results of that work. Uh, the 60s really, and the 70s really show that. And I'm so grateful, but also so humbled by it.
Thank you. Two questions sort of related about, I guess, the concept of ownership of land before. What is the traditional concept of land management, ownership, stewardship? If that, yeah, I think that's.
Well, it's, of course, it's going to be different for tribes, right? Or in tribal areas. For us, for the Puyallup, and other tribes in the vicinity, we certainly understood that the land belonged to us, right? It wasn't like the land belongs to everyone. It was like, this is our land for sure. And certain families, certain clans are going to have rights to certain fishing areas, to certain gathering areas. And a lot of that was a type of resource management, right? Like you didn't want everybody working one piece of land, right? So we wouldn't say that an individual owned a land. It would be more like, you had certain, almost like caretaking responsibilities towards parts of land. So it's it's a different type. It's a more of a relationship, a reciprocal relationship, than a type of ownership. Certainly wasn't a type of resource extraction so much as resource management.
The term, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Yeah.
The term
Oh,
I sometimes, I guess I hear in relation, the idea of reciprocity seemed, integral. And I'm just sort of, I guess I've heard that. I'm just asking too, as trying to learn.
yeah, I would say reciprocity. The land was so generous, and I think we can see this in the Medicine Creek Treaty, right? Where uh uh the just with the Article 3, right? That at no point did anybody think that they were going to run out of fish, right? That was just unbelievable to everyone. And every all of the diaries, everything that we have, there was such a generosity of the land, and it took care of us, and we took care of it. But yeah, you had to be in good relations with it, but it was hard not to be, I think.
Mhm. I think this question is in reference to the article, that the
Yeah.
photo that I believe showed your father.
Hmm.
The article is just shown, mentions that the protests related to sales of untaxed cigarettes. Are
Hmm.
you familiar with the compact between the tribe and the state of Washington concerning tribal cigarette sales? I believe this compact was made 10 to 20 years ago. Could you tell us how this is working out?
I don't know the current state of the cigarette, but that's true. This was in retaliate the takeover was in retaliation for the taxing of cigarettes on reservation land. I don't think that a priority of many of the tribes these days is cigarette sales. That doesn't mean that it's not part of the economy. I'm not familiar with it
Okay.
myself.
Um, You argue that the Puyallup Reservation exists because the Puyallup people have always lived there. And this is from Ken Workman saying, I'm Duwamish and have always lived on my land. What makes you a Puyallup different than me, a Duwamish? If that's, yeah.
Yeah, I don't. I I don't think the court history, I suppose. I mean, it's not. I don't. I'm not. I would certainly am not. Uh, I would say, like I said earlier about the Duwamish specifically, but even I said more broadly, is I think that specifically what happened to my family happens to families and tribal communities and tribal clans all across the nation. I don't think that there is it. I think the difference um, is sort of historical context, but certainly this is uh, a these are all the sort of different ways of colonial maneuvers of the state and the way it tries to remove our sovereignty.
Question, did any other Puyallup families that had allotments still have their land?
Yeah, about I think like well, if there's three other people that were involved in that court case, but certain I think there was like four to like a dozen other families as well that weren't part of that that court case. Some like down by the river and stuff. Um, and then now, of course, many people we've enlarged our land base, and there's been many more people have been able to buy back or buy other parts of the reservation and put it back into trust. So it's only growing.
Interesting.
Mhm.
Are there other questions I'm missing, or people want to raise their hand, ask a question, live question in a real face, or any comments from anyone else? Yes, please go ahead, Francis. Or
France.
France, sorry.
I really love that picture of your father being arrested because he seemed so centered. He just seemed so, I know why I'm here. This is all right. You know, there's no need to worry about whatever's going on around me. Yeah, it was brilliant.
Thank you. I really like that picture too. And if you know my dad, he's always really smiling and he's a pretty good guy. Yeah. Cecilia?
Was there another question I missed, or? Oh yeah,
Oh, I think you're
Cecilia, you're muted, whatever the
Yep,
can't.
I just realized that. Sorry. And I'm on my iPad, so I can't get the view laid out right. Anyway, so you just mentioned buying back that the reservation is growing. How much bigger has it gotten? I'm just curious. I know allotment is really devastating in the way that it chunks up the reservations, and so I'm just fine, and it excites me. I know casino money's enabled a lot of tribes in this area, especially to be able to buy back. I'm a big fan of the land back movement, and I just where are you guys at? Like, how much do you think has been recovered? Do you know?
I think that's a great question. I do not have the answer. It's in sort of constant negotiations. I would say it's getting bigger, every year. From
That's
my
awesome.
just sort of casual knowledge as as a Puyallup member.
Mhm.
Uh, it's really exciting. It's really, like from what I've seen in my lifetime, from I remember when after the land settlement, and around town, grew up in Fife. These signs came up that said like you're now entering the Puyallup Reservation, and
Mhm.
people reacted really violently, and there were some really terrible editorials in the Tacoma News Tribune. I was maybe in fifth grade, and it was a scary time. I remember being scared, and um, and so it's just it's kind of going back to how I began the talk and stuff like the what the sort of this this new is I'm so happy at how successful the Puyallup tribe has been, but it has been
Mhm.
at just constant perseverance. And again,
Mhm.
I it's like the Puyallup story is unique because it's the Puyallup story, but every tribe has this own unique story and this the way that they have persevered in these ways, right?
Mhm.
Um uh it's unbelievable.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Gerald?
Oh,
Were the Puyallups and specifically your family affected by the boarding schools?
yes, of course, yes. And all native people in the United States were deeply affected by boarding schools. And if they weren't directly themselves directed by uh, affected by boarding schools, certainly the generational trauma and the fear that we have been brought, that we that that is part of it is the language loss, specifically, um, is absolutely part of our people.
Was the school run by the federal government? Or was it contracted out to religious groups?
Yeah, it's almost always are contracted out to religious groups. My grandma went to Chemoa, which is what a lot of I think Northwest natives ended up at Chemoa. A lot of people from Alaska came down here and then ended up going to Cushman, which was on our tribal land. Um, uh, yeah, the there's nothing that is the crime of the boarding schools is something that is again something that we all feel deeply to this day.
How did it come to an end?
It came to an end largely, it really began in earnest with the Carlisle School. I think that was like in 80s, 1879. And then with the Merriam Report in 1928 came out, which basically said that actually these boarding schools are forced child labor. These children are existing under starvation circumstances, and then it needs to stop. And I wouldn't say it, it stopped slowly, but it took probably another like 20 or 30 years before they were largely stopped. Yeah, it's a I've only published one paper on boarding schools, and I will say that doing that research, growing up with having these conversations at the dinner table, like none of this was new to me, was the worst thing that I've ever research I've ever done, and the people who do that research are unbelievable people, because I'll never ever do that research again. It's too unbelievably cruel what the U.S. government did for decades. Cecilia, you're up next again. Or is your hand just still up?
I think her hand may just still be up.
Okay. Steve, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, just kind of following up on Gerard's questions. What are your thoughts about the Chief Leschi schools and how effective they've been in helping to preserve the culture of the Puyallup tribe?
Yeah, I think they've done some really great revitalization work with the tribes, with the students. Language is a huge part of their work there. It's okay, Cecilia. It's kind of annoying because because I go there a lot, like maybe like once a year, because I'm trying to get students to get excited about college, and I try to speak Lushootseed, and then they just talk right back in perfect Lushootseed. It's super annoying. But yeah, and so I wouldn't, there's always been, I guess I don't mean to correct you, right? But we've always had our traditions, and we've always had our language and our different ways. And it's great that Chief Leschi is a center where that can really flourish in a different community type of setting. Like I teach at UW-T, which is on Puyallup land. Like right now in my class, I have 4 Puyallup students. That's incredible. It's the way that education, once the Puyallup tribe really started having money in earnest, the first thing that they did was they put all that money into elder care, and then they put all that money into education, and educational support, and they've continued to do so.
Great, thank you. Wonderful story. Thank you.
Thank you. Ken?
Yes, I just wanted to say Quadid Danica, Tual Dogwe Hekwa Yatsa. Thank you, Danica. Sitsiab, honorable female person, for your wonderful words, and that you've covered all of my points, and that the language, bringing back the language, is so important. You covered that, and you answered my question about place. And so your place is just as important to you as my place is to me. Yeah. And so I just wanted to express openly a big hearty thank you for your presentation today.
Thank you so much. And, really, my hope is that you know, I'm able as an academic in the space that I'm in, that we make this space for all of these stories, you know, because I think that every community member, every tribal member, every tribe has just so many of these stories, and they're part of these just important histories in these unbelievable ways. And it's just so beautiful. So thank you, Ken, for that, because I know that the fight that you're fighting. Well, it looks like it's the 8 o'clock, and I'm frankly ready for bed.
Well, actually, I think Philip Hoffman has a question.
Oh, sorry, Phil.
Oh, okay. Judge Cochran's ruling, the roots of his argument that without a reservation you have no tribe come as early as 1890 in the wars over, policy wars, let's be generous about it, over the taking of Puyallup land for railroad construction.
Yeah.
The people of Tacoma in that era actually argued that since the lands were allotted in 1876, that the tribe no longer existed, and therefore there was no Treaty of Medicine Creek in effect anymore. And that argument has just been, it's a contrivance. I don't know how you can eliminate a people by eliminating a legal document, but the people continue to exist. It was a contrivance, and it was argued off and on for the next 100 years or so. But that's where it emanates from, as early as 1890 in the context of railroad construction.
Well, and you'll see it all across the nation as well. It's not specific to the Puyallup, but yeah, I mean, it's specific to the Puyallup, but also N+, right? Oh,
Jim.
I don't think there are any other questions. Well, if there are no other questions, then the president needs to wrap things up. You know, I have said many times that one of the benefits of Zoom is in the old days, we would meet at the Seattle Pacific University, and if we had 20 people, that was quite a good number. And now we have 75 people signed up to hear Danica. And the good thing is we have people from all over and people who sometimes don't join us. I mean, Ken Workman was here. And from my point of view, Andrea Wilbur-Saigo is aboard, which if you don't know of her, look around and you will see all sorts of lovely contemporary Native American art by her at the UW and the Chief Seal's grave and many other places. So it's good to see a lot of people who don't normally attend for this one. Thank you, Danica. It was a real pleasure. Keep in mind, everybody, April 25th, we'll have another meeting. We're going to hear about dramaturges, and then May 23rd is our annual meeting. And then September 26th, we'll be awarding the Pacific Northwest Historian Award, and you will all be, or the members at least, will be receiving a notification, a call for nominations for that award. With that, many thanks, Danica. We appreciate it. We're all grateful, and good evening. The meeting is adjourned.
Thank you so much. Have a good day, everyone. Head up, shut up.